Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 8th of August, 2025. I am delighted to report that I am once again joined by Sarah, who is joining me from, I think, somewhere in Greece. You're looking very tanned, you're looking rested, you're looking ready, as these say about Richard Nixon. But I just want to put on record my eternal gratitude to the wonderful Miss Laura Perrins, who filled in last week and was a hit. Was a hit, I think, with the audience. Which is great to see. But I for one, much as I adore Mrs. Perrins, I'm happy to have my Sarah back. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me back. And yes, it's Greece. It's Crete, actually, John. And you've just reminded me, because I haven't been there for 2 weeks, that to say thank you to all the people. I mentioned sciatica on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I was inundated with messages from people with different tips and different suggestions where to go and what to do. And so I couldn't respond to them all, but thank you very much to everyone who offered advice, because it was very welcome.
Well, I hope you're cured, and I hope you're feeling better, as we all do. Look, we've got a lot to get through this week. There's a lot of tragedy in the news this week. We'll start by talking about the case of the young boy Harvey Sherrat, who lost his life after a long wait for scoliosis treatment. We're going to talk about a woman called Maureen in Slough, who lost her life in Switzerland at her own free will, it should be said, at the Pegasus Health Clinic, and the lessons we might be able to learn in relation to assisted suicide there. Then we're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about free speech in Ireland and this business of the Mise Eire festival, which some of you may have heard about during the week, getting cancelled and now is potentially back on again. And we will finish. Sarah informed me that the news she's been reading about in holiday concerns Pamela Anderson, Liam Neeson, and maybe Bonnie Blue. I don't know what combination those people all figure out or work out in, but we will come to them towards the end of the show. But let's start off on the somber note about the death of little Harvey Sherrat. You mentioned this to me when we started talking about what we talked about this week, Sarah. So I'll just toss it right over to you.
I mean, what's there to say other than what a horrifying, tragic outcome for everybody involved. People who listen to this podcast regularly will remember that there was a number of times I went on a kind of a mad one about previous promises from Simon Harris about scoliosis treatment and that no child would wait. And the truth is that Harvey suffered in his life because the state failed him. And there never has been and probably never will be any accountability for that fact, or nobody will ever apologise, I'm sure, to his family for how he suffered in his life and how long he waited for treatment. And for that family and for him, it's now too late and he's not coming back. And, there's going to be this, we rant about the hospitals and, but there is that expression, how you treat old and sick is a measure of who you are as a society. And right now, this week, with this little boy dying, you couldn't say anything but that in terms of health, this society is a massive failure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to say here. I mean, the first is that we do not know, the family did not make public a cause of death. So we don't know. And I understand that this boy had multiple conditions. But just in terms of the scoliosis, which is obviously the most prominent and visible and pain-inducing one that he had, he did eventually get surgery last December, but it had actually gone so far. He'd been waiting so long on the surgery that the surgery wasn't able to fully correct his spine. Now, he had lived his entire life with this condition. And one of the things, if you can imagine about scoliosis with curved spine, is that it was putting incredible pressure on his lungs and his heart, which were being essentially cramped into positions that they shouldn't be. If your spine is constantly curved, your body's in a position where that's not normal, with pressure on his lungs and his heart for his entire life, and also causing incredible amounts of pain. And here we have a child who, in the Republic of Ireland, in 2025 and 24 and 23 and 22 and 21, lived a life of absolute pain and suffering, with a condition that for the entirety of his life was treatable with the right intervention and the right surgery. and he didn't get that surgery. And it's not about resources or money. The state has the resources. The state has the money. This is a very wealthy country in terms of the amount of money that the government has available to it, at least in terms of the money that can be sourced from corporate tax revenue and elsewhere. It is, his suffering was a result, to my mind, and I'm sure there are people in government who would dispute this, but to my mind, his suffering is entirely a result of state incompetence. I'm not even going to say state callousness or state cruelty, because I don't think there's anyone working in the government who would consciously, or the civil service, who would consciously set out to let a little boy suffer. I don't think that's the case at all. But state incompetence, the state's inability to marshal its resources in such a way to provide a young child with treatment that he's desperately needed. And now he has died, and whatever the cause of his death was in the end, he's died after a life of needless pain, needless suffering. And I think that's something we should reflect on as a society, because it is the job of the people running the countries there to make sure that doesn't happen, right? That is their job. Their job is to make sure that the resources of the state, the money we all hand over to them in taxes every month, their job is to manage that money and make sure that the country is well run and people get the help they need. That is the purpose of you. That is why you're there. That's why you go into politics. That's what you run for elections saying that you will do. You all fucking failed. Every single one of you failed. Failed this kid. And it wasn't the doctors who failed him. It wasn't the nurses who failed him. It was the state and the people running the state. And I'm not pinning it on Simon Harris and his broken promises in that regard. I'm not blaming it on Micheál Martin. The whole shaggin' lot of you failed, including, I would argue, the opposition politicians who highlighted his case, but never were able to identify themselves the things that could be fixed. You know, I think it's just.
But I also think, John, that, you know, Simon Harris did specifically say that scoliosis treatment, that no child would wait. It was part of his election speak. You know, he banged that drum himself. He made himself. He laid out his stall and he said that scoliosis would be addressed, and it hasn't been. And so, you know, I think that if you do that, you face or accept the consequences of your failure to deliver on that message. So, yeah, okay, you don't want to personalize it too much, but I think that if you're a family member or of this little boy, or you're somebody who's still waiting with a child who may also, you know, have the similar situations, like, you're entitled to feel extremely angry personally with Simon Harris, since he went about making your situation a personal drum that he beat, and then he seemed to just walk away from it.
I think that is true. And I think this is where I never like to personalize this, but people like it when I personalize it. I don't know why they do, but in this case, I think it has to be personalized. Like, I don't think it speaks well of you as a politician when you make a promise like that and then aren't publicly invested every day in making sure it gets delivered. Like, when you make somebody else's crisis your electoral soundbite, you stand on television and say, I'm going to fix this problem, and you don't do it, you're giving people false hope. You're standing in front of them and you are giving people false hope, which is just about the cruelest thing you can do. Imagine walking in to the parents of a sick child and knowing that that child is almost certainly going to die and saying, actually, I think he'll be fine. It's a really cruel thing to do, because it delays people's acceptance. It prevents them from seeking other options. It prevents them from maybe looking abroad. If you stand in front of them and say, I'm going to fix this problem, and then you don't do it, you are doubling their hurt. And to do it for votes, essentially, to do it, and this is the thing, and it ties into everything I say about the Irish government on this podcast and in my writing and elsewhere, which is this false compassion. You go out there and you say, we care. We care more than you do. We care more about Gaza than you do. We care more about housing than you do. We care more about the world. We care more about the sick little children. We're good people because we care. That is the message. We care. And when you have the opportunity to deliver on that care and actually do something useful, you don't do it. You don't do it. You make a false promise, then you go away and then you pretend you care about something else. No, I mean, it's the kind of thing that you should be run out of office for, in my view.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, I'm glad I don't have to go to sleep every night with a broken promise to Harvey Sherrat on my conscience. But there are people in this country in politics who can't say the same thing.
I don't know.
Anyway, there's not much more to say about it. I mean, the other thing we don't want to do on this podcast is to be seen to be weaponizing or politicizing parents' grief. It should be said, by the way, Gillian Sherratt, who's Harvey's mother, is, as far as I know, a liberal, progressive person who has many, many disagreements, probably with you and I, on politics in general. But she's a mother and she's a human being, and her son has died and he shouldn't have died, and that's not good enough, one way or the other. Whatever she thinks about us, whatever she thinks about the show, whatever her views are, she's suffered a horrendous loss, as has her husband, and that's not good enough, in my view.
Yeah.
Look, it's kind of difficult. I don't know where we started that topic, because it's kind of difficult to move on to another one. And this one is slightly less anger-inducing in a way, because it has nothing to do with the Irish government or the Irish politicians. But did you read during the week of the case of Maureen Slough?
Yeah, I saw some of it.
Yeah, so Maureen Slough, for those who are listening and don't know who we're talking about, Maureen Slough was a woman from County Cavan. Say was, because she's no longer with us. She also has died. She died in Switzerland. She died at a clinic for ending your life. She died listening to gospel music and Elvis Presley, we are told. Or so her daughter found out. Her daughter is called Megan Royal, and she found out that her mother had died after she got a WhatsApp from the clinic in Switzerland, the Pegasus Clinic, to which Maureen Slough had travelled. And she got a WhatsApp saying, your mother has died, her ashes will be with you and will be posted to you. And this obviously came as a surprise to Miss Royal to learn that her mother had died in that fashion. And it was even more of a surprise to her to learn that she herself had written a letter to this clinic to say, yes, my mother is aware of her decision and she's in sound mind and all the rest of it. And that the clinic had apparently confirmed the existence of this letter by sending an email to an email address that had been provided for the daughter. And it turns out, or appears to be the case, that what appears to have happened is that Maureen Slough was so eager to end her own life that she essentially forged a communication from her daughter to say that the family approved of the decision. And Maureen Slough is now dead. Her daughter and the rest of the family are bereft. They had no idea this was going to happen. And she's exercised her free choice to end her own life. And it just strikes me, and I'll toss this to you, but we hear in the assisted dying debate all the time all this language about safeguards and the importance of safeguards and the importance of, making sure that people's, dignity is protected. And we very rarely hear about cases like this, where those safeguards appear to have failed quite catastrophically in this Swiss clinic, number one, and number two, where a family has been really affected by somebody's individual choice in a way that, is perfectly legal in Switzerland. What do you think of it all?
Well, off the top, it's the kind of scenario where you would be absolutely argued down at dinner parties and over cups of tea with friends who were in favour of this kind of thing, that they would argue with you that this would never happen. You would be shouted down that this was a nonsense, but here it is in living colour. Second thing is that you're also argued with about the concept of euthanasia all the time, about end of life and horrific physical incapacity, etc. And this was for depression, not for a second to diminish depression, but still not motor neuron disease or something which left the person completely incapable of speech at a certain point. And this is a woman in her 50s. 50s. I mean, maybe it's just because you and I have suddenly come into our 40s, John, but I think 50s is pretty young. And finally, the lack of safeguarding to find, I mean, it's dark to get a message on WhatsApp. I don't know, not that getting a text message would be any better, but like to be getting a message on WhatsApp that your mother's ashes are being sent when you didn't even know. It's just, the whole thing is just so dark. And it's the stuff that people would argue with you to the end of the earth would never happen, could never happen, will only be for extreme cases or whatever. But here we are, Switzerland, 50-something, depression, and the family finding out from WhatsApp what happened to her, what they're told happened to her, what she listened to. I mean, how will they ever know for sure, because they were denied the opportunity to be with her? And I appreciate that that's her own choice, but like, we're Irish, we've done dying a certain way for hundreds and hundreds of years. We have funerals. There's still massive trauma, in my opinion, for example, amongst the Irish public about the way funerals were forced to be held during COVID. So this idea that you get a WhatsApp from somebody who's decided to go to another country and end their life or whatever is, to me, just dark and very, I think, will be very culturally jarring for a lot of Irish people, because that's not the way we do dying.
Yeah, but I mean,
like sorry, John, to interrupt you, but like, your death is your own to a point, but it's also the process of you dying is also a process for your loved ones. And I just think this whole thing is just really dark.
I mean, see, this is the logical end of the ideology of choice, though, isn't it? Like, you see, because everything you said there, if you start, you objected to her age, and for the avoidance of doubt, I agree with Sarah on this, but I'm just laying it out, just like where the logic of this all goes. You say she's very young to die. Well, if you've a right to die when you're 75 and you've got terminal cancer, why don't you have a right to die when you're 58 and you've depression? Why don't you have a right to die when you're 21 and you've autism? Why don't you have a right to die when you're 30 and you're chronically obese and you think you'll never get a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Your life just isn't worth living. If you have the right to make the decision to end your own life as a rational, free-thinking person, then you can't put age limits on that. First of all. Second of all, you can't put other people's feelings into the equation. I mean, that's just irrelevant. I mean, imagine you're there and you're 86 years of age and you're dying the most agonizing death known to man. You've got the most agonizing tumor that is just causing you excruciating pain every day, and the medications don't really help. And you want to die to end your own suffering, but your shitty little 15-year-old grandchild says, "No, I don't want Granny to die. I love Granny." So you're forced to stay alive. I mean, the logic of choice says that's absurd. The logic of choice says the 15-year-old grandchild doesn't get a say in your decision to end your life. So why should the daughter in this case? And obviously we're talking about real people, so I'll say it respectfully. But from the point of view of the person choosing to die, why should the daughter get a choice? It doesn't. If you accept this ideology that personal choice is always and everywhere, the overriding, push button that decides whether an issue is evil or sensible, then there's no stopping it. And there's none of this safeguards business, and there's none of this, it's only for the old, the sick. It can't only be for the old and the sick once you decide that people have the sovereign right to end their own lives. And so I think the problem is the whole ideology of personal choice to begin with, and the absence of its corollary, which is not a religious ideology at all, just the idea that you have obligations to your fellow citizens, one of which is to live. I think we have an obligation to live. I think we have an obligation to society to live. I think we have an obligation to our families to live. Because of several things. First of all, the example that you set. Second of all, the nurture and care that you provide. Third of all, the fact that you opting out of life affects the culture in a way that has repercussions beyond your own life. I mean, we have talked on the past on this podcast here about cases of people who are really young and healthy in places like Holland deciding to kill themselves. And it's almost like they're doing it to make a point or to make a story out of themselves. You have to think about the impact of what you're doing on society when you set the laws. And I think a society that lets people do this to their own families, I'm sorry to speak ill of the dead in this case, and I'm sure she wasn't in her right mind, but ultimately this woman did this to her own family. And a society that empowers people to do terrible things to their own family members is making a bad choice, in my view. Maybe that's not the most logical or coherent argument I've ever made. I don't know. But I think it starts and ends with the ideology of personal choice just being flawed. And we can come to that in the case of Bonnie Blue later on.
But John, the other thing is that, and I agree with everything you're saying, but the other thing is that we're reliably told, or always told, that it'll be this kind of, end of life care will be this very compassionate, very rare, very sort of nice thing that will happen or whatever. But the truth is, and we've discussed it before, is that when it becomes a business and when it's people making money off it, that all slowly, very quickly falls away. And as we're seeing right now, it's gone from it'll be lovely end of life care to fucking Jason from DPD will be delivering your mum's ashes tomorrow between the hours of 2 and 4 and press 1 if you're going to be home or not. Like, on what planet did somebody, regardless of whether a business thought they'd gotten an email from a daughter or not, think that WhatsApp is the appropriate way to be communicating with somebody who's lost a loved one? A funeral home wouldn't do that. That wouldn't exist in other scenarios. And it's proof in my mind that when you start to act as if this is all normal or that life is nothing, what follows is ultimately a callousness about life itself, because it's a business and people are there to make money.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sadly, I think you're right. And the thing is, though, like, society is inexorably drifting this way. I mean, we've seen this bill passed in the UK, and they're going to introduce it there. And in every society where it's happened, the same thing has happened. And that is, I go back to this ideology of personal choice, which is the one now that governs essentially every society, where people have lost the ability to either make or comprehend the moral argument against personal choice. The moral argument that says you have a duty to suffer. People are horrified by the idea that they might have a duty to suffer for the common good. And when it comes to matters of end of life, like, I watched a family member die a couple of years ago, and it was not pleasant. The person had a long and quite a difficult and prolonged death. And their last 2 days, I wouldn't wish on anybody. Now, it was suffering. And there were parts I remember sitting, as I have over the years, when you get to your mid-40s, the chances are you've done it a few times, right? With grandparents or older relations. You've sat and you've gone through somebody dying. And there have been times when the thought has entered my mind, God, would the nurse not just up the old dose of morphine there? Just ease the passage. Just, we all know this is heading towards a particular conclusion. Can you just speed it up a bit? Like you would for an animal. I get that argument. I get it. I feel it viscerally in my bones. I understand it. But our arguments have consequences, because everything has a downstream side effect. And once you start to say, out of kindness, you can choose, or your family can choose for you, to end your life that little bit earlier. It is, people talk about slippery slope arguments being insane, but assisted dying is the slippery slope argument, because once you concede that somebody has the right to end their life because it's too difficult for them, then none of us live in somebody else's shoes. None of us can truly say, well, your suffering is bad enough that you can exit, but yours isn't. You're forced to stay there. And therefore, I think there is, and there must be embraced, that we do have, and this is not a religious thing. I'm not a religious guy, but I think there's a duty to suffer. I mean, we will all reach an elderly stage in life. I will. Barring car accidents or sudden heart attacks, I'll be in my 80s someday. I may have a sickness and an illness, and I think then I will have a duty to suffer it and bear it, so that I'm not setting that precedent where people say, you can just walk off stage once it gets all too much for you, because the impact that has on other people around you is something that has to be considered. The damage you do to other people's lives, the example you showed for impressionable young people, like the people in the Netherlands who've got anxiety and want to end their lives because it's a little bit too difficult rather than seek treatment. And of course, the impact you have on the culture, because this isn't directly relevant to this particular case, but once you accept the right to die, it very quickly becomes the duty to die. Who are you, if you're 86 and you've got cancer, to hang around blocking up that hospital bed when there are people here who could actually be fixed, who just need a knee replacement, and you're sitting there clinging to another couple of years of life when you've no quality of life anyway? You're selfish. That's the culture you create. And, I'm afraid I'm shouting into the void on this one, because I think we're inexorably headed in that direction. But I think one of the reasons we are is that people in society have lost the courage to make difficult moral arguments to people and tell the sick person who's suffering that actually, you've got a duty to lie there and suffer for the common good.
Well,
But
what
you do.
I also find interesting about it is that, Ireland has, this is my understanding, relative to other countries, or some other countries, quite high suicide rates. And I think most Irish people would know of at least one person who has taken their own life from suicide. And what I find strange about this is that what's the difference? And in this case, we're talking about it's depression. So, and you would imagine that most people in Ireland who take their life are depressed. So why is it less tragic to commit suicide, and it's just your choice to commit suicide? It's sort of less tragic to commit suicide if you do it by appointment than if you do it by not appointment. Like, how is it not the exact same thing? And as a society, when we're encouraging people to talk and, to tell somebody if they feel depressed or whatever, I mean, how is this woman who snuck off any different from people who do it all the time? And are they not equally horrifying?
They are. And look, there's family suffering here, there's family lost, and there's a family who found out about their mother's death in horrifying circumstances. But there are, as you correctly point out, there are people who lose people, who take their own life every day of the week, who find out in horrible circumstances. And it's just the sort of uniquely clinical nature of this one, I think, that is kind of shocking. Anyway, look, we will move on, because we spent the first half of this podcast talking about death, and that's quite heavy. And so we hope that you haven't been too depressed. We're going to move on to not cheerier topics, but something that's a little bit perhaps more of our usual thing, and talk about this business of the Mise Eire festival being cancelled and then uncancelled and then maybe cancelled again, and no one knows what the story is. Have you followed any of this over there in your haunt in Greece?
No, only what you've been telling me, but it doesn't sound like much has changed while I've been away, put it that way. Go on.
Yes, well,
Everybody's
the
getting
official story,
because the far right are taking over the world again, is it?
Yeah, well, the official story is, now, I'll be honest, because people who read Gript will know I haven't been around this week either. I was in Dingle, and I was, looking at whales. We actually went on a lovely whale watching trip with from Ventry, and saw some minke whales and some dolphins and some sea lions. It was excellent, and played a bit of pitch and putt in the rain, and generally had a nice little time. Not as glamorous as Greece, but we had a nice time. But I wasn't watching the news. But I did see this business. So there's this festival, it's called Mise Eire. Now, if you want to ask me who was speaking at it, I don't know. If you want to ask me what the whole gist of it is, I don't know. I've only read about this festival, what I've read in the newspapers. And from what I can see, it was kind of like some kind of Irish far-right Woodstock. So I think you had,
John, if it was the far right Woodstock, surely we should be at it.
Well, this is the thing. this is the thing. I read about these far right festivals getting cancelled. I'm like,
Why are
well,
we not
how
invited?
far right was it? I was at the Percy French Festival 2 weeks ago. That was pretty hardcore. That was like Eddie Hobbs was there on the Wednesday. He made his speech, and then I came in, made my speech on the Friday. Like between the two of us, fairly hardcore. But no invitation for you or me to this Mise Eire thing. So it must be proper fringe. If you and I are too left wing to be invited to it, it must be proper fringe.
Yeah.
In any case, what does it matter? These people were all going to assemble in Drumshambo of all places. It was, I presume, going to be a bit like Philadelphia for the Continental Congress. They were going to make some big declaration about kind of like the future of the nation, etc. But the locals, or not locals, the sort of people who call themselves anti-fascists, who always claim to be local, whether they are or they're not, they said this was a terrible thing to be happening in Drumshambo of all places, and they were going to get it cancelled. And they sent out this email, sort of petition to the great and the good to ask them to weigh in behind the getting the Mise Eire festival cancelled. And of course, they got all sorts of people. I think they got Charlie McGettigan, who won the Eurovision with that song all those years ago. They got, of course, Kneecap. I think they got Christy Moore. All the great and the good basically weighed in that these fascists should not be able to have their little country, their little traditional music kind of far-right festival. And lo and behold, the venue pulled the plug on them. Now, as we record this, there's some word that it may go ahead anyway. They may have secured private land. But I just think it's fascinating that we live in a country where people are really, really, really opposed to other people having a meeting.
There's a really funny comedian on TikTok. She's Irish and she does these kind of videos. And it's like, how do you know you're a melt? I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of someone being a melt. But anyway, how do you know you're a melt? If you start a petition to stop the Mise Eire festival, you're a melt. Like, just little to be doing. And the thing is you say, like, the irony of it, that Kneecap and stuff would be signing things to stop. Like, have you any self-awareness whatsoever?
They don't. I don't. I mean, when I saw the Kneecap had decided they were going to sign this petition, I just assumed there must be a whole load of Jews who were going to be at this thing. But I don't think there were. Like, I mean, these guys who stand up on stage and wave their Hezbollah flags, and then, as was Laura was saying on the podcast last week, they march into London, like, into the magistrates' court in London with like 75, King's Council behind them, giving out that their right to free speech is being abridged by His Majesty the King's government. And then the next week they're over in Ireland kind of going, Eddie Hobbs is going to give a speech in Drumshambo. We've got to shut the whole thing down. And these people are the ones who are taken seriously by our media. It is a joke. It is a joke.
But you're like, but it's really bordering on parody, if not parody. Like, are you thick, or are you just deliberately? You're so arrogant that you just think the rules should only apply to other people and not you. I mean, it's fascinating to watch that people, they're so convinced of their moral superiority to everyone else that stopping them from speaking is some sort of hate crime, and stopping other people from speaking is the greater good. It's wild. People will study this in the future. They really will. People, like, there's children being born today who will be writing a college thesis on how mad some of this stuff is.
I don't know what to say about it, really. I mean, it's one of those ones. It's like it's nearly too easy to analyze, and you kind of feel like there has to be something deeper there. I mean, people don't come on this podcast and listen to us just to hear me saying Kneecap are hypocrites. They want free speech for them, but not for anybody else. But then you realize that's actually it. They want free speech for them, but not for anybody else. And why is that? What is the underlying root cause of that, beyond sort of a commitment to totalitarianism, whereby there shall only be one ideology and there shall only be one way of thinking of the world, and only one way of thinking of the world shall be given a platform? And that is that is essentially something that has infected the upper echelons of Irish society and indeed British society and to some extent elite American society. They're constrained over there by the First Amendment. Doesn't mean that they don't have the same instincts. They do. And I don't know how you combat this other than just mocking it. I don't really know how you combat it.
But I think it's more that, like, I don't have any expectation whatsoever that Kneecap are going to wake up one day and say, hold on, actually, do you know what? I might not agree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. And let's all sit down and have, in-depth debates about things and hear all sides. I don't expect that. What I get surprised by is how other people, smart people, commentators, people in media go along with it. That, like, why is there not an article in the papers this week in comment across multiple about the hypocrisy of this? That's the surprising thing. How are more people not just going, oh, you know what, like, this is a bit, we've seen glimmers of it. We saw Ben being defended by other journalists with
no, but there's a point here though. There's a point here. We saw Ben being defended by other journalists, and that was a we talked about it at the time. That was important, but I think the reason why Ben was defended by other journalists is that Ben has kind of served his time, and what we've done with Gript is reluctantly, not reluctantly on our part, but reluctantly on their part, kind of forced the establishment media to concede that we have a right to exist. That we they might not like what we say, but they understand that our journalism is mostly, according to their standards, sort of like, it's journalism of a kind. We mightn't like it, but it's there. They've got a right to exist, and we've crossed what you call the acceptability threshold. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that we have, but that's why it was okay to defend Ben. Now, there are people out there who will say, well, Gript, when you cross that threshold, you're no longer one of us. You're kind of mainstream now. I think that's nonsense. But the thing is, for a lot of these people, the kind of people who go to the Mise Eire festival, and I'm presuming who they are, by the way, because I don't know much about it, but I'm gathering, they haven't crossed the acceptability threshold. I mean, God, Philly Dwyer might be there. Philly Dwyer might be there with his phone, recording people, kind of going, how are you here? Philly Dwyer here. Glad to be here. Tell us what you think about these immigration and this foreigners coming in and taking over the country. And that hasn't crossed the acceptability threshold. That's the kind of thing where your average mainstream journalist thinks, well, I can't defend their right to free speech because people will think I'm defending them. People will think if I say, but that's it. That's the level we're dealing with.
That's the whole point. Like, it's so childish that it's like, how have we not evolved our thinking, our maturity in these kind of these hard conversations, past the point of me or somebody being able to tell the difference between me defending somebody's right to say X and me believing and agreeing with X. Like, it's like literally people just walk around life still like having, the way sometimes people still have this nonsense tagline on their Twitter being like, all rights my own, or opinions my own. Who else's would they be, you gobshite? Like, do you know what I mean? That will look good on the minutes of this meeting. It's Twitter. Get a grip. So it's like they walk around, feeling like they have to establish, like I said before, you have to kind of like, I don't know, you have to lure people into a false sense of security by establishing ground rules like, I'm like you, I'm not, we all agree X, Y, and Z, and then you might sneak in an opinion behind it. Like, it's just so unbelievably childish that we still haven't evolved past the point of people saying, people like Philip Dwyer and people like these kind of people, they have the right to congregate, they have the right to have their meetings, they have the right to talk to each other if they want. And if you believe in free speech, you have to accept that that's part of it.
Well, look, I can be guilty. I think we can all be guilty of it. We all understand the instinct. I mean, if you said to me, John, does Justin Barrett have free speech? Those of you who don't know who Justin Barrett are, I mean, congratulations. Those of you who do will know what I'm talking about. And I would still feel the obligation to kind of go, yeah, he's a complete buck Egypt, but he has a right to make a fool of himself if he wants. But in saying that, I'm kind of I'm kind of, I'm casting moral aspersions. I still have to say, well, he's obviously, I would not like him. I wouldn't approve of him whatsoever, but he still has the right to stand there and make a complete arse of himself. And rather than just saying, yeah, Justin Barrett has a right to free speech, because you are always conscious, I think, when you defend somebody and their basic rights, to make clear to the viewing audience that you're not necessarily associating yourself with them. And I think people find that quite difficult. There are people who find it difficult even with you and me. There are people out there who find it difficult to defend your and my free speech because they still think, mainly because they don't listen to us, that we're a pair of extremists representing an extremist media outlet, and that if they defend us, they must also be extreme. And that instinct is dominant in society, nonsensical though it is, unfortunately. That's what I think. And
I just,
yeah,
I think your commitment to free speech is literally at the moment you start to feel uncomfortable. That's where it falls away. Like, everyone's committed to, Mary and John talking about save the local library. Like, that's not a commitment to free speech. Commitment to free speech comes into the parts that make you really uncomfortable. That's the point. Because the whole idea is that like, maybe in the future you'll need your speech to be protected for whatever reason, like, saying that a man is a man or whatever. Like, so your commitment to it is like, you have to be an adult and just say, like, it doesn't matter whether I agree with people or not. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to get into specifics about anything. I'm just committed to free speech. And as long as it's not within the parameters of the law and inciting hatred or whatever, people, as you say, have the right to make a show of themselves, alienate themselves. The public will weed out, I think, public know crazy or whatever when they see it. But we start cutting off free speech because we now know, and we're learning it in real time, year on year, that what one person interprets as hateful speech is very, very different from what I might. And so you just let it all in, and that's your commitment. That's being committed to free speech, not picking and choosing. It's just it's not a menu. Like, you can't do it like that. So you let them have their festivals, and I don't know anything about the Mise Eire festival, but I accept it as a Mise Eire festival as much as next week I have to accept it as a festival of, and has been in the past, naked men walking down the street talking about trans rights or whatever. I don't want to make that illegal.
That is true. Well, look, as far as I understand, I heard, and again, if I'm wrong about this, forgive me, haven't been paying as much attention to the news this week as regular weeks, but I understand that they intend to continue the event on private property somewhere, and good for them. And by the way, I'm sure there's lots of things that will be said at the Mise Eire festival with which I will not agree. But that's society.
That
If
doesn't
people want
matter.
to go, and
That doesn't matter.
exactly.
Like that's other people's festival, and we live in a free country and people can go. If we're going to accept some of the shite we have to listen to about women and men, we can have a Mise Eire festival.
Speaking of women and men, let's do our segue. You wanted to talk about, I missed this entirely. I don't know what kind of gossip magazines you're reading over there in Greece, or like what kind of papers you read. All I have written down here is Pamela Anderson and Liam Neeson. Can you explain why I've got that written down?
Well, the reason why I was saying it is because we were talking about, so wind back a second. We were going to talk about Bonnie Blue, right? Because a Channel 4 documentary came out this week about Bonnie Blue and her having
God
sex
love
with
her.
1,000 men and whatever, right? And I was saying that actually in the comments, and some of our regular listeners are kind of Bonnie Blued out to an extent. And they do get a bit irritated when we talk about her because they feel like we shouldn't give this kind of horrific nonsense airtime. And I'm not completely disinclined to agree with them, but unfortunately it does become part of mainstream media. It has come into the news again this week because Channel 4 have done this documentary, and so we were talking about whether to talk about it or not. And I was suggesting to you that as a antidote or a palate cleanser, we'll call it, of the deprivation of humanity that is encompassed or embodied by Bonnie Blue, we could talk a little bit about the kind of nice, sort of cute love story that seems to be emerging between Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson, who both have had, Liam Neeson in particular, tragedy in their lives and have seemed to have met each other through work and seem to be mad about each other. And from what I've seen on the internet, people find this really cute and really nice. And I'm just suggested that we mention it as a little palate cleanser, like I said.
I mean, the only time I've seen Pamela Anderson in the news recently is when she went at the Met Gala in New York, and
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
and she basically rocked up with no makeup on, and her hair was cut really short, and she looked like this is one of those things where people people either say she looks terrible or she looked great. But let's be completely frank here. She just looked old, right? She looked all of her years and maybe some more. And
What
the
what age
scandal was
is
that she.
Pamela?
I actually don't know. I could look it up for you right now as we're recording the podcast as to what age Pamela Anderson is, and I will do this, and
I
I'll
would
keep
guess
talking to
she's
fill
in her
time as I do it.
I would guess she's in her 50s.
She's 58.
And I did see those pictures. I did see those pictures of her with no makeup, and I mean, good for her. I think she's beautiful. She looks in her 50s. So what? She's making a political point. That's a matter for herself. You don't know that. All you know about you as a 42-year-old man or 41-year-old man or whatever you are, John, are telling me that the only thing you know about Pamela Anderson is that she showed up to the Met Gala a few months ago with no makeup on. Are you
Oh,
really?
no.
Do you
The only
expect me to swallow that
contemporary
elephant?
thing, the only
All right.
contemporary thing I know of Pamela Anderson is that she showed up a couple of months ago to the Met Gala,
Yeah.
looking a little bit older. I mean, obviously, I am of the I came of I turned 18.
The age. Yeah.
Well, that's perhaps the more pertinent point is I turned 14 in 1998, right? So she was at the height of her powers then. I know a lot about Pamela Anderson. Speaking of Bonnie Blue, she actually made one of the first sex tapes, of course. So like her hands are clean in that regard in terms of the pornification of society, if you want to say that. Although it was a lot less extreme than what Miss Blue has been up to. Look, I think it is happy for them. Happy for them to I don't know how cute it is. I haven't seen how cute it is, but like if two people fall in love and are publicly in love, good for them. Happy, especially
Well,
as you say, Nick. And I know there are people who have their issues with Liam Neeson's politics and all the rest of it, but like he has suffered tragedy in his life, and if he's found love at this age of his life, good for him. Happy for him.
I don't care about his politics. I just think that for some reason, so this week, like I said, we have this documentary out, which seems to me, and I'm not going to watch it, but it seems to me to be, would you agree, a documentary of the events where Bonnie Blue has sex with over 1,000 men in a 12 or 24-hour period or whatever it is. And Channel 4 actually have produced this and are showing it on TV. And it's just, I mean, we knew it happened and we talked about it at the time, so no point going over how horrifying and objectifying and disgusting it is. But I somehow think it's a new low for Channel 4 to be doing a documentary and showing it, or showing.
So I read
glimpses of
Laura did a review of sorts of the documentary for us for Gript. And again, it wasn't here. I just read it. I didn't read it before. I didn't do the editing of it or anything like that. I just read it. And it seems to me that on this Channel 4 documentary in relation to Bonnie Blue, like, it was explicit.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing really left to the imagination, in terms of which, and I think it's different. We've obviously discussed Bonnie Blue enough on this podcast for several generations, but like we do it because people are interested. Even the people writing in the comments, we don't want to talk about Bonnie Blue. Trust me, people. I see the readership figures. I see the clicks. People engage with Bonnie Blue content. They do. What that says about society, I don't know. That's why she's so rich. People engage with her content. I don't even think that most of the consumers of Bonnie Blue's pornographic content are consuming it for a sexual kick. I think at this point it is sheer morbid horror. People are watching
Yeah.
this stuff to see if it is physically possible. I don't even think maybe I'm wrong about that. I just don't even think. I think it is kind of like it has become almost like the circus freak act. It's become the kind of like the bearded woman of our age.
Yeah,
It's kind of
I would say, I would hazard a guess that if you got the demographic breakdown of some of those people, that there's a lot of women in there now who aren't normally as high a porn consumers as men, but are watching it out of fascination.
I think you're completely right. I mean, but let's talk a little bit about the editorial decision of Channel 4. Laura, in her piece, I thought used an apt comparison. She said that, like, essentially this is the equivalent in terms of what, I mean, Bonnie Blue's latest stunt apparently was going to be, and I think this got knocked off. It was going to be that she was going to put herself in a cage somewhere in public and literally anybody could approach and do anything they wanted to her sexually. That was the idea. Literally anyone off the street could use any part for any purpose that they wanted, so long as that purpose was sexual. And Laura's comparison was that this is the equivalent of somebody voluntarily swimming in human excrement. It's the equivalent of if there was some guy who said, I am going to immerse myself in human sewage and I'm going to do it for your enjoyment. People mightn't pay as much to watch that. You mightn't get the same kind of attention, but it's the functional equivalent.
The internet.
And
It's the internet. People are weird.
And Channel 4 have basically decided that this is entertainment because they're documentary. I mean, this is the thing. They will do the thing where they will say, well, this is an educational documentary exploring issues and it is exploring what's happening in the culture. No, it's not. Don't sell us that shit. You're doing the same thing every media outlet, including what you and I are doing right now when we talk about Bonnie Blue, just on a smaller scale. You are exploiting this woman's complete lack of respect for her own body or anyone else's for viewership. You're doing it to get the controversy. You want the controversy. You want people to watch it and be shocked and horrified. That is why you're showing her vagina on television. That is why you're showing her vagina being penetrated on television. You're not doing it for any noble purpose. You're doing it for kind of like titillation. And and at the same time, then you're kind of doing the faux, isn't that terrible? Like, you're actually worse than Bonnie Blue. Bonnie Blue is honest. Bonnie Blue is saying, I am going to fuck 1,000 guys on camera and you can pay to watch the event. Channel 4 is saying, we're going to document how this woman has made this extraordinary decision to have 1,000 people have sex with her. And we're going to do an investigative documentary on it. Yeah, it's hypocrisy. She's more honest than they are. Yeah. Like, that's what I think about that.
But it's also that, you know, I know that people will say she's an adult and whatever, but like, you know, the way we've talked before about the changing the language around child pornography to be child rape imagery. Like, I think this is kind of abuse imagery. This is, you know, this is not porn. This is somebody deeply disturbed. Do you know what I mean? Like, like they wouldn't film if a man, okay, you use swimming in excrement, but if a man said, I'm going to stand there, I'm going to let people stab me. I'll have a doctor there. I won't die. I definitely won't die. But I'm just going to film. Everyone's allowed to just come up and stab me. They wouldn't let it happen. Like, it's kind of abusive. Just because she is like, it's just so dark and cynical. They're getting ratings from the abuse of somebody who is disturbed, in my opinion. And, you know, as Laura said in her article, like, yeah, you can say it's none of our business, but it impacts society and we have to live in this society. And my children will grow up in this society. So I do have something to say about it. I think it's dark, and I don't think Channel 4 should be showcasing something that is, you know, the byproduct of somebody's mental illness, if you ask me.
I'll tell you, if I was making that documentary, it wouldn't have been about Bonnie Blue. My
You had the
documentary
guys.
would have been called, my documentary would have been called Number 774.
Yeah.
And it would have just picked guy number 774. And it would have like followed him. He got up that morning and he put on his shirt and he, did some aftershave and he kissed his wife goodbye and he kissed his kids on the head and he went off and he said, I might be a little bit late home this evening. I've got an after work meeting that's going to go on a bit. And then he lined up in the queue and there were 773 guys before him. And then he maybe he used a condom, maybe he didn't. He inserted himself where 750 odd blokes had been before. He was there for about 3 minutes, pumping. Then he went home and I had the camera going, did you have a good day, buddy? How do you feel about yourself after that? That documentary I would watch, because I think that is actually that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, she couldn't do this. She couldn't do what she's doing without the legions of entirely disturbed men who think nothing of being guy number 774. I mean, they're the ones. Laura made the point that this is like a bloke rolling in human sewerage and treating a woman like a semen depository was a thing she mentioned. No, I mean, I think, and I mean no personal disrespect to Miss Blue when I say this, but I think the guys who are rolling in human excrement is guy number 774. Actually, guy number 6 and above, to be honest, are the ones voluntarily doing that, and I don't think there's nearly enough focus on them. That's my view.
Yeah, maybe at the end of your documentary as well, they have to kind of come into a room with like their mother and their sisters and stuff. Though their mother can just say, have you lost your absolute mind? Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you
Well,
do
not just
that?
them. They're not just the mothers, the wives
You
and the
do that.
kids. Look,
Fine, but
we talked about.
do you do that to go down to the pub and tell your mates? Like, it's so weird.
It's bizarre. It's utterly bizarre. It's utterly
Anyway,
bizarre. Look,
John, to come back full circle, that's why I'm pretty happy about Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson, okay? Because at least they're normal.
Sarah and I have this thing where we say to each other quite regularly, we read about these stories, and obviously we're grown adult people who were both married. We've had our relationships and so on. Isn't it great to be reasonably normal? I think it's just one of those things to be reasonably normal, to have kind of like whatever kind of issues you have, be within the normal parameter of kind of like normal.
Yeah.
And
just like going down to Harvey Norman on a Saturday and then skulking off to have sex with Bonnie Blue without anybody knowing. You are a dark individual. You are not a normal.
You can never predict what scandals will emerge about you in the future. And I will not say that, I've lived a perfect life, but I'll tell you this, the scandal you will never find out about Mr. McGurk is that he was bloke number 774. That's just never going to happen. So, it is what it is. Anyway, is there any other business?
No, what a note to end on.
We said we weren't going to do it. We said we were going to talk about Pamela and Liam. Look, I will just say this on Pamela Anderson. I do actually, I was very much in the kind of good for her camp when she rocked up to the Met Gala. What does it matter? My opinion does not matter. But I was in the good for her camp when she rocked up, like, looking herself at the Met Gala. Because, like, you go through phases in life. You have your youth, you lose it, you move on. And, as somebody we both entered our 40s, our youth will desert us in time if it hasn't already. And somebody who can accept it and say, screw it, this is what I am now. I no longer have my youth and I'm still worth looking at. Fair play to her. That's what I say.
But also the message is like, I got it is my impression. I don't, I'm not 100% in this, but that she has had quite a tumultuous love life and has been treated quite badly by men in her life. And that she is kind of cast away all the, makeup and the whole thing, loves herself, and now has found a really nice man who loves her back. I like in the age of dark, disturbing, weird people out there, isn't it just nice to think that exists?
Yeah, well, that's you. You're a romantic at heart. You always have been. You always will be. Yeah, it's nice. It is nice. It is. All right, we will leave it there. Thank you very much to everyone for listening to us. That kind of was a podcast that went from obviously one extreme of emotion to the other, with the tragic deaths of Harvey Sherrat and Maureen Slough, to Pamela Anderson's love life and the exploits of Bonnie Blue. We hope the change in mood was not too jarring, but that's it. We call this the week that really was when we talk about what happened during the week. So we'll be back. Sarah will join me again, I think, from Greece next week for another edition. And we will see you then. So until then, I've been John, she's been Sarah. This has been the week that really was. Thank you, all of you, for your continued support of this podcast and for your very nice comments. I did indeed buy a fan for those of you who were expressing concern over the melting state of this room last week. I appreciate your comments. That's been fixed. And I hope we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.